Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly too. Do let me know. It should be all good. I'm gonna check my sound is actually working. Yes. Okay, might turn it up a bit actually. Well, thanks for waiting for and welcome to my live stream for June 2019. Thank you to all my supporters who've been supporting me, especially over some people who've been supporting me for over a year. It's made a big difference to my being able to actually continue doing this. So I very much appreciate it. If I sound a bit funny this morning, it's because it's 6 a.m. and I kind of just got up at 5:30 to do this. First of all, I've got a number of questions I'd like to answer from my patrons, and we've got some good questions today. So I hope that being that it's early in the morning and I haven't had anything like coffee, that I can answer them. So first of all, let's see. Albert asks, how does frequency response affect perceived detail, soundstage, and timbre? That's a good question. There was an interesting guy who, a very, very, very old timer from HeadFi, who started back in 2001, and he was doing a lot of stuff with software where he'd take something like a $10 pair of earbuds. Was it earbuds or IEMs? I forget. And he'd very carefully do an EQ on them so that he could improve the sound much to make them, sound much better than $10 earbuds or IEMs. And he did a pretty remarkable job doing that, but he couldn't EQ in detail. So the limit of detail retrieval depends on, I guess, the quality of the driver, and but also the enclosure of something like headphones or IEMs will, I suppose, resonate or reflect different frequencies. So if you know that, say, a enclosure of, say, a pair of headphones or IEMs resonates at a certain frequency, and I suppose if you EQ down that frequency, it will resonate less and will improve the sound quality of those earphones or headphones. So you can actually do a lot using a high quality EQ from what I've experienced. In if you know what you're doing, you can probably EQ in a lot of improvements onto various headphones which have visible issues, such as maybe, as I said, maybe the enclosures have, for example, Grado headphones, which I should have not a pair of Grados as such. There's an interesting thing. If I can disentangle them, they're attached to the camera. Here's a pair of, these aren't great, well, they were Grados, but there's an interesting thing called the tape mod for Grados, where they worked out I think it was 2 kilohertz, that the particular size of the earpads on these would resonate, had some kind of resonance frequency somewhere at 2 kilohertz. So if you actually put tape around the pads, you would actually damp the 2 kilohertz resonance. But I mean, you could EQ that out as well, although for better or for worse, the sound. But as far as perceived detail, I think that's an issue that comes up a lot, that people were talking about, say, the Empyreans, and because they're kind of darker tuned sounding headphones, people perceive them as not being as detailed. And I think that's been a long issue, in that the amount of, let's say you level match two pairs of headphones at 1 kilohertz, but let's say that one pair of headphones has a much lower treble response than the other pair. Then I think the other pair with a higher treble response will sound more detailed, because you'll hear, obviously because it's louder, you'll hear like the detail in the treble, such as, say, cymbals, more clearly, and you'll assume that it's more detailed. Whereas if you listen to, say, a singer's voice, which might be closer to 1 kilohertz, and where they're kind of equal level, and you're listening for very fine details about in the sound, then you're probably more likely to, I guess, you'll hear which pair of headphones has more detail or can retrieve more detail in the sound, assuming it's not overwhelmed by things like the bass. So I think that's as far as detail goes. That's my thought on that. And what's happening here? Just so you know, I can't. The chat's over here. It's supposed to be in my YouTube view here, but actually, I'm just looking in this, and it's not showing up. So I'm supposed to have my chat on the iPad in front of me, and I can't see it. So let me just see if this is okay. Let's see if I can get the actual chat coming up. So I can see we see you guys without continually turning over to the to this. Come on, it's not showing up. That's really irritating. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay, now I can see you guys clearly. So morning. I'll say morning to everyone. Morning. Hi, Travis. Hi, Nick, and everyone. And I'm getting the. I should turn the sound off on the iPad, otherwise I'm going to confuse myself. And hi. Oh, if I try and pronounce, I'll just say Ramos. If I try and pronounce your name, I'll probably stuff it up and I'll embarrass myself. So, okay. So now we're back onto the thing about Albert's question about how does frequency response affect perceived detail, soundstage, and timbre. Soundstage is an interesting one because I suppose to a degree, and from what I know as far as how we experience soundstage, it's on the timing of sounds, how the timing of sounds arrive at our ear, but also I think their strength to a degree gives us some degree of perception. So, for example, you'll have headphones with, say, or earphones with recessed mids, and because if you imagine a live stage where you have the singer, the further away you are from the singer, the further the quieter the sound generally, except some good halls will not do that, and so you'll perceive them as being further away. So tend to have some headphones with a V shape, or actually some audio gear will deliberately have, even though they say, look, it measures ruler flat, actually they'll have crosstalk in there which has a slight V shape. So you'll see a lot of amps have a slight V shape in the crosstalk measurements, and they will give a sense of slightly wider soundstage. So I think, if you also see equal loudness contours, you'll see that the strength of the level of bass you hear is higher, and the level of mids is low, and the level of treble is high. They're kind of like they're curves. So I think a lot of how we perceive, and I don't know this clearly because I'm not an expert, but how we perceive soundstage is affected by how far away the mid range is. So some various manufacturers do kind of, if the mid range is very forward, it doesn't sound like the soundstage is quite as big in some respects, unless there's a very large degree of clarity and we can hear very clearly delineate the instruments. Timbre, well, that's another thing. Again, if you listen to an actual instrument, then you listen to it reproduced through various headphones. For example, I've noticed a lot of instruments, if the headphones have a kind of rolled off treble, then the instruments can sound like they are a bit muffled, or if like the lower mids or upper bass is a bit rolled off, which you get with some headphones and earphones, then the kind of the weight of the instrument doesn't come through. Like some instruments where you expect that kind of lower rumble, which may not be that actually low in frequency. If the mid bass is a bit recessed, it can sound like they're a bit weak, like the body of the instrument is kind of not there. So there's a lot to it, and you kind of just pick this stuff up as you go along. You try different headphones, compare, and you go, actually the instrument sounded different, but what's different in the frequency response? And you start comparing stuff, and it kind of builds a picture in that. So that is a thing in that because headphones, we can't have a completely flat response without it sounding unnatural. How can I say this? There's always going to be like trade-off in how we perceive stuff. How certain tuning affects our perception of different music. And what's, of course, more irritating than that is different music will be recorded by different people on different systems, and how they'll balance the different levels of the different frequencies may change, so that because all music has been mastered by different people, then you might get some consistency between a particular mastering engineer if he masters a lot of stuff. But other than that, that inconsistency too will cause issues, such as when I did my FIO FH7 review, I thought it sounded, that kind of mid-forward setup was really good for listening with instruments. But when I listened to a very mid-forward recording like Jazz in the Pawn Shop, it was like too much of a good thing. So it has it's never quite perfect in that way. Oh, thanks for the compliment on my reviews. I'll answer some questions from the chat once I've got through I've got 4 more questions, which is probably going to take a while. 4 more questions from supporters, and I hope my voice isn't dying here too much. Yethal, who unfortunately can't make it to the chat because it's 3 a.m. where he is, asks, is there any measurement that can be used to predict and measure soundstage in headphones? Good question. Being that it's 6 a.m. in the morning, I have to think about this a bit before I can answer it. Predict? Well, again, you could say maybe recessed mids, but I think that, let's say if you have a pair of headphones which don't retrieve a lot of detail, say a pair of cheap headphones, even if they do have a V shape in the sound, they will still, because of the lack of sense of separation between everything, they will probably not sound like they have a great sound stage. But it's an interesting one because I was playing with Focal's Utopias, which have a great sense of depth and in how they present stuff, although they sound very narrow. But if you look at the frequency response, now if you put it through SonarWorks, which is something I was supposed to review and I didn't get around to. SonarWorks is software where you can, they have a matching, if they have something that matches your headphones, they can give you essentially a rule of flat frequency response within, to some degree, within some variation. And they sent me a profile for the Focal Utopias. And interestingly, that sense of great sense of depth and that narrow sound, if you ran it through the rule of flat thing, there are two options. They have rule of flat, and then they have options to actually boost the bass slightly and boost the treble slightly. And if you one of those close to flat variations, that sense of depth disappeared, and that sense of narrowness disappeared. And they sounded like regular headphones, where they kind of sounded reasonably wide and but not so deep. So it's interesting that sense of perception of depth that you get out of with the Utopias, or at least I find with the Utopias on my gear, disappeared if you EQ'd them. So if you look at a Focal Utopia frequency response, well, I don't know. That'd be interesting to think about. Now, I could be. They are kind of upper mid strong too. Maybe that's something. Headphones that are upper mid strong have a sense of space. Maybe. Be interesting to investigate. So there may be something there in terms of our perception. But it's a bit, I could call it above my pay grade. So that's the one thing I've come across, which is interesting to do with maybe to do with frequency response and the sense of soundstage. So iSurviveD. iSurviveD asks, if you were leaving on a trip for 2 to 3 weeks, what gear would you like to take with you for listening sessions? For portable, probably a Hugo 2 rig, plus I guess the FIO M11 plus, I don't know, some IEMs, or if I could fit them in my bag. I wouldn't, if I was traveling, I'd probably get a pair of Sony WH-1000s or whatever, noise cancelling headphones. But if I could take stuff where I was kind of in the hotel room stuff, I'd probably take a Hugo 2 M11 and some headphones, even something like this. I like these kind of semi DIY Symphones Magnums. Long story behind those. I should do a video on them. It depends. Yeah, it depends what I can fit. If I was taking headphones, yeah, probably those. Or some IEMs. It depends. If I was taking my family, probably IEMs. Otherwise, I'd annoy them trying to listen. Van Jim asks, I realize this topic may have too many landmines. My thoughts on USB cables in general. My thoughts on USB cables are there are big landmines. People talked about USB cables, so I went out and bought a pair of Oyaide, which is a Japanese brand. They're called D Plus Neo. And I have a couple of those. One is 5 meters. I bought the longest one and the shortest one. One is 3 meters? Sorry, 3 meters long. And one is about 30 centimeters long. It's somewhere at the back of my system at the moment. And they're kind of very stiff cables, but they had actual measurements showing that what they call like an eye measurement, which looks like a kind of very strange looking thing, that it cleaned up the digital signal. And they have it's a kind of wide cable, so it separates the data lines from the power lines so that they don't interfere with each other. And I noticed a subtle difference on different things. I did one thing where I had a Singsa F1 USB to SPDIF converter, and I tried going directly from the thing powering it with no cable and using a long SPDIF cable versus using say a USB cable like the iSurviveD probably, and just an adapter. So I plugged the F1 directly into the back of the DAC, hanging off the back. And there are pictures of this floating around in some of my videos actually. And there was a subtle difference in sound. So I prefer to put money into things like I've got an IFI iUSB 3, and we've got the I've got the Kitsune Tune Edition SU1 here, or someone recommended the what was that streamer? Nick, what's that streamer? I've completely gone blank in my mind. A good USB transport or filter or noise thing, preferably, or trying to use no USB cable at all, to use an adapter, which if it's practical to do, than caring about USB cables. And I mean, if I had lots of money, I could go out and buy like 20 different USB cables and try them all, and then post a review of them and have people abuse me for thinking that I could hear difference in cables. But so the answer is probably there's something to do with probably mostly noise and noise cancellation, and it would have less of an effect, I would think, on stuff that has isolated USB like Shit Audio or Chord than it would on stuff which doesn't. And so it's just a difficult thing that really, if I could get an oscilloscope and measure stuff and then experiment with how it compared to how it sounded. And then there's stuff like how the DAC responds to different levels of noise and other stuff might sound. I think Rob Watts was talking an interesting thing about how brighter and harder sounds sounded like they had more detail. So people tended to favor like the hardness seemed to sound clearer to them, whereas if you took away all the distortion and all the noise, if things sounded a lot darker. And if they, people, which was actually closer to what the music actually sounded like. So it's one of those things. It's kind of, you're flying blind. You just have to try stuff and see what you think. But yeah, they're kind of, USB cables are not good value, but the iSurviveD ones weren't too expensive. And I just use them because they at least have some kind of technical explanation behind them. And I have a lot of equipment here. I mean, there's probably noise generated by everything under the sun, so who knows? I mean, I have actually my computer power is isolated, as isolated as it can be with a noise filter, so at least doesn't dump heaps of noise into the audio system. And I have no idea how much difference that makes, actually. Anyway, sorry if I'm ignoring the chat here. Next question was Novice Nick actually asked the same question. Yeah, it was about he has a hard time fathoming spending $500 to $700. I mean, if you had like a $20,000-$30,000 system, then it's kind of not that much. But it would have been interesting actually. When we listened with the Shangri-La, they did have an AudioQuest Diamond USB cable there, and I didn't have the thought at all to do it because it was just it was a closed listening thing, and I didn't want to ask. But it would have been interesting then to try. It was from a Chord Dave. I don't know, what was it? Feeding a Chord Dave, we had an AudioQuest Diamond cable from my iPhone. Yeah, it was yes. That is that ridiculous. From using a camera connection kit to using an AudioQuest Diamond cable. It would have been interesting to try a generic cable versus the AudioQuest Diamond. The interesting thing on that is I did try a lot of like using my iPhone versus using other stuff as a transport, and with different results. and that's changed the sound. Or the other thing actually I will do on cables if it's not too entangled. So I have a cable that I was using from my and there's funny noises here. It's because I'm playing. It's attached to the stand, which I found. I was looking for a USB to micro USB to Lightning cable, and I bought one. I put a ferrite thing on it, which makes no difference, I think. But Mi Nova, I think it was. I forget. Anyway, here's the cable, and I have two. One is really long, and one is very short. It's in the drawer behind me somewhere. So this I use for going from the iPhone to the Hugo 2 when I go to meets. And this is the long one I use for going from my iPhone to use with the Centrance mixer face, which is with the microphones plugged into, and and for when I'm doing the stuff like the IEMs and the DAPs. And what I did was I tried going from my iPhone to the Hugo 2 using this versus using this, and the sound quality for some reason dropped using this. And my theory is that maybe the Hugo 2 when it's processing, its circuitry removes all the jitter and well, I don't know about the noise, but it supposedly removes the jitter. But maybe the processing of higher jitter or higher something, which is caused by the longer cable, and this is probably a cheap cable inside here, maybe some kind of noise getting into the system may have degraded the sound in some way. But it did sound worse, and I can't quantify it. It was ages ago that I did it, but I noticed it didn't sound as good as I remembered it to be. And then I changed the cables around, or I changed transport. It's like, oh, there's the sound quality come back. So take from what you may. It's one of those things that I just don't have a clear answer to, without a lot of experimentation and probably some equipment to quantify what exactly is going on. So, William, our last question before we get into chat, asks, with your FIO FH7 and FA7 reviews, which genres of music can you categorize into which IEM? Yeah, I can't really categorize genres as much. I didn't think about that so much because maybe there are some genres I don't listen to, like I don't listen to rap, for example. Yeah, I don't. That'd be a trickier one to do. I think I like the FH7 overall more, regardless of genre anyway, because it just is better clarity. So, I mean, I think the increased clarity was very noticeable. Whereas some people might find that, I think it's just in general, not so much a genre, but thing in general, that some people might want a more relaxed listen and prefer the FA7 if they don't want something that's so in their face in terms of sound. But any update on prospective Luxman P750U and ZMS reviews? I need to contact Zach. I'm slack on that. There are heaps of stuff I need to contact people about. Personally, I hate bugging people for stuff. I hate asking for stuff. And that's probably my only negative thing is that. But the Luxman, yeah, I should talk to the Luxman distributor. They actually distribute. I think they distribute Focal as well, so I've got to talk to them anyway. So that I just haven't asked them. I prefer to ask them at shows and then follow up via email, because it's easier to walk up to someone in person and then get to arrange something than be some person who's emailing out of nowhere, which is much harder. So if I know a manufacturer in person, or I know their local distributor, then they'll go, oh yeah, sure, no problem. So it tends to all come around to the shows I go to per year in Tokyo, where I'll go talk to people and they'll go, yep, let's organize this, and then do it. So actually the stuff that's coming up next is going to be Stax. Anyway, so let's have a look at what have you all been saying in here. See if I can, let's see, we catch up with all the all the things you've been saying. Looking for a solution to make my Susvara less peaky through IFI Black Label. Well, I don't know if it's, yeah, it'd be interesting. How much power does a Black Label put out? And how loud are you listening? So probably, I don't know, Susvaras, ideally need a speaker amp for best results. I don't know if I've never tried the Black Label. Unfortunately, I can't see how much, what it's like to listen with them. But it could just be not a good equipment match, I reckon. Would a Note 9 Plus Mojo be a good option to replace my AK240? I wish, yeah. I guess for convenience, a lot of people prefer using a phone. So yeah, a phone, if you can store your music, enough music on that to your satisfaction, plus whatever you want to use, might be a good option. If you're like me and you use Tidal and use a Tidal offline, the M11, that's what I'm going to be using from now for a lot of stuff like Tidal offline, because it's easy to plug into stuff and just use music. Especially if I'm going to the Tokyo shows, I'll be using the M11 and a Hugo 2. So, but I mean, if it makes sense to you, yeah, I suppose so. Especially now in AK240, the main thing now is just the interface is really slow. Let's have a look. What are you all saying down here? Will a WA2 be powerful enough to drive a Susvara? Oh, no, no, no. WA2, I think, wasn't that an OTL amp? I don't think so. Woo Audio's WA2. Let's have a look. WooAudio.com. What was it? Susvaras need stuff which is really, really powerful. I mean, if you listen really, really quietly, you can get away with... If you listen quietly, you can get away with probably a lot. But if you turn up the volume... And that was the interesting thing. A friend of mine who reviewed the Audio Valve Solaris said it's a fantastic amp. And then I thought, yeah, it was a pretty fantastic amp. And then I plugged the Susvaras in and I was like, okay, this is listening fine. I turned them up just, I would do the test to turn it up a bit louder than I normally would. It started clipping immediately. And that's where you run into problems if you start listening at any more than moderate volume. Here's the thing, actually, before I forget. Go to my site, and there's now a thing called there's now a headphone power calculator, and put in the specs of the specs of the Susvara. I think it was what are they 83 decibels per milliwatt, and what is it? How many ohms are they? Was it 60? I forget. I'm probably wrong on that. And put in their specs into the headphone power calculator. Then select 120 decibels versus 110 versus 100, and notice that the power requirements go as you go from like 100 to 110 to 120. The power requirements just go shooting up. So it goes from being milliwatts up into watts. It's a huge difference. Let's have a look at what the WA2 has. I don't think the WA2 has that much power, actually. We'll have a look. Highlights in the box. No power specs anywhere. Or have I missed it? No power specs that I can see anywhere. Well, that's not helpful. Oh, it's an OTL headphone amp. No. Probably not. Totally opposite of what you need. Yeah, you need stuff with a lot of power, like a speaker amp. Some people when the HE6 were out, were buying cheap speaker amps to power them because that was the only thing that could really make any serious difference. Yeah, that's something that would take a long time to go through. Have I had an experience with the Abyss Phi? Only it meets, I should really see if I can borrow a pair for a while and review them. Be nice, because apparently the times I've heard them, they've been really fantastic. Actually, I heard them out of a WA5 from Woo Audio, which was very nice. And it was that nice Woo Audio smoothness with the kind of liveliness. That was a really nice listen too. I know when they're set up correctly, they can sound amazing. But it's something I just have to see if I can borrow a pair sometime. If wondering if you have a recommendation for aftermarket cable to kill the peaks. Moon Audio Black Dragon. But I think, yeah, you need something with actual genuine power. Something portable isn't going to power a Susvara. 4 watts. Black label is 4 watts. Oh, okay. Yeah, the thing with power output is it's going to be class AB. It's not going to be, well, there's watts and there's watts, yeah. It's a bit more complex than that. But the thing is it going to output that much power at the impedance of the Susvaras? And again, I've got to find out what the Susvaras output impedance is. I've just gone blank on it. It had in my head what the impedance was, which is really silly. I think it's 60 ohms. But now I can't find everything. They've changed. Oh, they moved. Oh, it's all on products. Okay, let's have a look. What it was. I just remember it being 60 ohms, but we'll find out. No, I'm correct. 60 ohms and 83 decibels. It doesn't say if it's per 1 milliwatt or per 1 volt. I could be wrong on that, but the thing is, when you see specs on an amp, specs aren't, it's not 4 watts at every output impedance. If it's at 32 ohms versus if it's at 120 ohms, it's a big difference. It could mean that you're only getting stuff or power at the for your headphones. So it's not quite so simple. I'd have to go and have a look. What is the iFi? We can go and look at the iFi site and have a look. iFiaudio.com. But even if it does have that much output power, yeah, as I said, it's going to be interesting to see. If you plugged, this is something my friend Nathan does, who I did a live stream, not a live streamer, who I did, no, we did do a live stream once. And he measured stuff, you measure stuff like, he measured equipment just fine as it is. And he showed the measurements. Then he plugged earphones in, which had varying impedances, and then measured the amount of distortion coming out, and it was a huge difference. So it's never quite as straightforward as you make out. Analog. Where are we? Was it digital? Micro? No. Oh, yes it is. iFi has so many products I can never keep track. Everyone does these big scrolly websites. Can you see? Oh, you can't see my computer. Which just waste huge amounts of space. Oh, here we go. HP, let's see if it's output. No. Filters, specifications, headphone output power. Here we go. 4,000 milliwatts at 16 ohms. 166 at 600. 1560 milliwatts at 16. Here we go. Power continues. 1.5 watts at 64 ohms. No. There we go. There's your answer. It's a bit, if you don't listen too loud, it'll be fine. Like if you listen at fairly quiet levels, I don't listen that loud. If you turn it up, I bet you it's going to hit a wall. Let's see. How is the dynamics of Utopia compared to other top-of-the-line headphones or the LX? Fantastic. LX were pretty good dynamics, I thought. Have I got everyone's questions here? A lot of stuff came through. Okay. So another question from Lone Star is Chief-I, especially IM, a game changer and giant killer like BGVP? Yeah, they can. One I've got to review. I've been slack, and apologies to Charles when I see him sometime. Are they in here? Oh, they're maybe not in here. Are they in the... Are they in here? No. They're floating around. I've got a container full of IMs. Talking about game changers. Oh, they're in here. Which was the Shozi CP. I just got to shoot the review of this. I'll leave them on my desk so I don't forget. Oh, these are really good. $165 and they sound fantastic. I've just got to shoot the review of that. I just keep forgetting. Problem is that I have too much stuff on my desk. I put it all away and then forget to shoot it. Let's see. Have you heard? Next question. I just got to go look down. You just to clarify, Meg, you have the Susvaras, like the $6,000 Susvaras, which I've got sitting back there, not the Sundara, because the Susvaras, need a speaker amp. Where the Sundaras, which are the, what are they now, $350 or something, do not. Have I tried the DMP Z1? Is that the big expensive amp? I've got to get them. It's too early in the morning for me to remember what product model names. Oh yeah, I've tried the DMP Z1. I'm just to get my mind the correct. So Z1 has come up in Sony so many times. I get everything mixed up. I did try it at the Tokyo shows. I have no particular opinion. I'd have to actually borrow one and try it for a while to get an opinion. So Sony stuff tends to be very smooth sounding in general. So actually, the very funny thing is there's a company called Van Nuys, same name as the Los Angeles location, Los Angeles suburb, which is they make bazillions and bazillions of cases, and if you check out, I think it's van-nuys.jp, and they make a case for the Sony, and so you can actually carry it around like a portable rig. And they can plug headphones in and use it while it's being carried around. It's very funny. It's like the ultimate portable rig. And I thought of doing a video on that just because it'd be so funny. But I'd like to see if I can borrow one from Sony someday. Would be nice, because it's quite an interesting. For some people, I'm sure it would be an excellent, excellent thing to just use, to buy one device and use that only. And I think there are a lot of people out there who just don't want to think too much about hi-fi or headphone hi-fi and want something like that, who will just buy it. Okay, so Albusher said, I tried the Susvara with the micro BL and the amp distorted on... the amp distorted. Yeah, it would. You're not going to get more. It's not going to do more than 1.5 watts out, which is not enough for Susvaras. No. Just let me get into clarification about that discussion before. For the Susvaras, you need a speaker amp just about. I can get away with listening at moderate levels with other amps, but seriously, yeah. Okay. If you spent $6,000 on a Susvara, take them somewhere to like a hi-fi store or something and plug them in. Ask if you can plug them into things, and speaker amps. Some of them may have a fair amount of power out of the headphone outputs sometimes, but maybe not enough for Susvaras, I don't think. You've got to take them to a store where you can try different amps. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Rather than what you've heard, or go to if there's find out what people are using in, say, the Susvara thread on HeadFi. Okay. What will be the lifespan of well-built headphones if they are cared for well? 5 years or 10 years or more? I don't see 20 or 30 years. Don't see any reason why they deteriorate for any reason if they're taken care of for quite a long period of time. Headphones that did deteriorate, I remember the Sony MDR, the MDR R10s, the ones that were made in 1989, they deteriorated because they had a glue holding the driver in place. Holding the ear pads on, which deteriorated and would touch the driver and ruin it. And that's what killed a lot of MDR R10s. A lot of headphones nowadays don't use glue, so regular headphones most headphones that are screwed together and have no glue in them should last indefinitely, essentially, if they're taken care of. You just may have to change ear pads because the foam goes flat. If eventually the foam will just deteriorate, and ear pads are readily changeable in most headphones, so generally they should last, forever. Let's see. Okay. How are we going? How's the Meze Empyrean sound with the Hugo 2? Oh, yes, it sounds fantastic. That's what Meze used to demonstrate the Empyrean. It's a really nice combo. So no problem there. The nice thing is the Empyrean is very, very easy to drive. So it just will sound as good as whatever you plug it into. And yeah, the Hugo 2 is excellent. You take a walk with a Susvara after dinner. So walk down the street neighborhood with $6,000 headphones on. Fantastic. Where do you live that you can walk down the street with $6,000 headphones on? That's quite cool. Where I live here, it's actually you can only hear birds chirping, which is fantastic. I could actually do that in the morning, walk around with headphones on, and being that I'm a strange foreigner around here, that essentially I could get away. I could just be no weirder than usual. What do I think of portable amps like the Hi-Fi-Man R2R 2000? Oh yeah, actually I did have a listen to the R2R 2000. It did have that old kind of Burr Brown multi-bit DAC sound. There are no particular opinion. I mean, if with anything like that, if it's something that appeals to you, then go for it. Some people really like that old sound. Some people don't. It's kind of up to the individual. Some DACs were tuned to have a kind of warm old school sound, like the good old Calyx M, which I have sitting here, which that has an ES 9018 in it, but still sounds kind of warm and engaging. Yeah, some people seem to think that, especially if you listen to acoustic music, people prefer the R2R sound, which is why you have multi-bit DACs, which is why some people like the Modi Multibit, which is sitting behind me, which I've just almost finished the review for, which I'm very, very, very late doing, but whatever. So, yeah, I think some people just like that particular kind of sound. How does the M11 you reviewed recently sound as a phone versus a phone plus Dragonfly Red? I've never had a Dragonfly Red here, unfortunately. Someday, maybe. I should just get one. I had the original Dragonfly, and I thought it was overhyped. They were talking like it was $250 and the greatest thing ever, and I thought it was actually okay, but not that brilliant. But I mean, I suppose compared to a lot of headphone socket outputs, it was probably much, much better. I think that's what they're supposed to be, that better than the headphone output. Actually, I did try. There's someone. I really surprised one of my friends by saying this. This is the good old Apple dongle, and actually, I listened to it and I thought this is going to sound terrible. I listened with the Solaris, and it's actually isn't that bad. It actually was quite decent. I should just review it. I was surprised actually how decent it was. Okay, so what do I think is a logical upgrade from LX? Is the Utopia? No. Oh, LX. Oh, it's the Utopia. Sorry, I was thinking Empyrean. LX, the Utopia. Well, if you have some good enough gear, sure. I mean, if you're just plugging them into a phone or something cheap, then yeah. You want really, really good gear. You want really, really good supporting gear with the Utopia for it to be good value, because to me it just perfectly revealed how good or bad anything was, to the point where I was switching. Usually I don't play around much with interconnect cables either, any more than I do USB stuff, and I have some good interconnects obviously, and I noticed sometimes there's a bit of a difference, but with the Utopia there's like, wait, I can hear clearly the difference between my interconnects. Oh god, that's just not where I wanted to go. So it depends on how good your gear is. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to want to spend that amount and can afford to spend that amount of money, and you can still eat, and you're not going to be wondering about where your money is coming from, yeah, I mean, why not? And if you're listening to good music, if you're listening to cheap, compressed pop, then Utopias won't help you. If you listen to like classical and good recordings, and you like hearing, the details of the plucks and the guitar, then things like Utopias are fantastic. Do you think R2R multi-bit DAC will make a comeback? And no, they won't. Is the reason being that, well, the Shit Audio's Yggdrasil is a good example of that. The industrial DAC chips are horrendously expensive, and the reason they're horrendously expensive is to do accurate R2R is nigh on impossible. And this is why the R2R chips were only 1648. Well, actually, they did do better than that. They weren't better than 16-bit, but they did do high res. You could receive high res, although you needed, if you didn't just use the same receiver chips they had back then, you need to do your own programming. Because they didn't receive I2S, they received a thing called write justified, which is slightly different to I2S, I squared S, sorry, not I2S, I squared S. Yeah, it's kind of complex, but the accuracy required, and I talk about this in 2 reviews that are coming up. If you'll actually find that some DACs which are ladder DACs, which say they're 24-bit, are actually not 24-bit. It's just they truncate it. You can't do 24-bit with resistors. You can't even technically do 16-bit. Is the most accurate resistor you have out there is a 1% resistor. So you think 0.01, right? 1 on 100. The accuracy needed for 16-bit is 1 on 65,535, 536. Yeah. So basically, you'd need it's kind of technically impossible. And even if you do some tricks, you can double the resistors to get you multiply the accuracy. Multiple resistors. You can do compensation boards, which is one resistor ladder board compensating for the other, and other stuff that you can do. There's a whole list of stuff that can be done to make resistor ladders more accurate. Then still you can't really truly get 16-bit. It's still going to be a large amount of inaccuracy somewhere in there. But you can get, I suppose, some of this, if you do all the tricks and use 1% resistors, you can get pretty close. The other thing is resistors are switched in and out by things called switches, and those switches are not accurate enough really to do a fantastic job. Then there are other issues to do with glitching, and yeah, it's not really something that's worthwhile for manufacturers to make. It's just not something they're going to make in quantity ever again. I think the industrial chips are the closest you're ever going to get. So yeah, that's unless someone else decides to try to do what Shit Audio did, you're probably not going to see any more resistor ladder chips ever appearing for audio. Where are we at? Wells Audio Head Trip 2. Oh no, that'd be interesting. I'd love to own one of those, but it's too expensive. 50 watts into 8 ohms. Well, that's a speaker amp. That's the kind of thing you need. What do I think of the stock cable of Susvara? It's kind of crappy and basic. So, it's okay. You can do better, much better though. Okay. So if there are no more questions, hold on. Metrum non-oversampling R2R DACs are incredible. I used to have a Metrum. It was one of their small ones before they started making big DACs. Yeah, I think you won't see if you're going to see ladder DACs, you're still going to see the ones made with resistor ladder boards using all the tricks I just talked about. So yeah, it's going to be basically that from now. It's going to be everyone talking about where are we, Hollow Spring, Audio GD, and Denafrips. And for people who don't want to spend money on a Total DAC, or something like a Rockner Wave Dream, which whether that's a lot better, worth $15,000, I don't know. Yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, but I do like the sound. I have 2 reviews coming up. One, totally opposite end of the spectrum, the Mimby and the Hollow Spring, which I've just almost finished shooting because I wanted to do different stuff around, move the video around a bit as I do. So once again, while we're still here, thanks to my supporters for supporting me in making making my videos, because without their support it wouldn't have been possible. So while we're here, if you do consider, if you're not already a supporter, and I do know quite a few of my supporters are here, for the equivalent, I like to say the equivalent of buying me a coffee once in a while, it's like even just $2 a month will help support my videos, and you get to ask me questions just like you are now in chat, and I'll help you buy gear or help you with choosing gear and stuff like that. And considering, like, especially if you're spending thousands on gear, that $2 a month for a bit of advice and discussion probably will help you. or if you do feel like it, there's also the super chat option in YouTube, which if you want to say, if something I've said today has helped you, please do consider sending me a super chat. So, yep, I will talk to... who was the... sorry, I didn't do a draw this morning. Instead of cutting up the paper to do the draw this morning, I was messing with YouTube, which decided to change my live stream key on me, and so the result was missed doing a draw this morning. But I will do one. Not